is Professor Albert Zhang. I used to be a tenure accounting professor in Chinese University of Hong Kong. I worked there for 7 or 8 years, and then I moved to York University in Canada. And a couple of years ago, I decided to come back to Hong Kong to support the ESG knowledge development in Hong Kong. So a key advantage of Hong Kong PolyU is that there is a research center in PolyU called CSEF. It's a long name, but let's make it short, CSEF, which is the very first research center that is specifically related to the development of ESG knowledge in Hong Kong. And so our one of the job duty of the center is that from time to time, we will invite established scholars in ESG and green finance to share with us, all the Hong Kong's professional peoples, the latest finding and understanding and insight from their recent research. And the another key objective of CSEF is to connect the senior and established corporate executives and with many of our professional accounting professionals in Hong Kong. And so for these two objectives, and today we will have the Dr. Colin Zhang, who is my current colleague in PolyU, later to present his research finding. And then also today we are glad to have two very senior, established and successful corporate executive, Roy Fan, which is a director of climate change and sustainability services and financial services from EY. And also Dr. Rocky Tang, the director and head of policy research from Financial Service Development Council. Okay, so now we have a very senior professional practitioner, and also we have a very senior and professional regulator to share with us their valuable understanding about ESG. And then very interesting thing to add is now everyone look at 4 of us, and then we are, I suddenly noticed that we are so global because Dr. Colin Zhang is from UK. He used to be a seasoned faculty member in Manchester, UK. And the Ledman is from Tilburg, Netherlands. And Roy is also very global. He talked about working in multinational places, and I'm from USA and Canada. So, well, let's have our wonderful journey begin.
We'll now have our next 2 speakers. We'll start with Roy Fan, and maybe while Roy, of course, can share more details about himself, I thought it would be good to share a bit more details about all his experience before. So Roy is a director of climate change and sustainability services, specifically financial services at EY. He has been at the United Nations as a former climate change specialist, has been there for 7 years. And during that period, approved more than 7,000 cities and projects following the Kyoto Protocol. So that's a very heavy feat. In addition, he's been back in Hong Kong since 2016, has been working with more than 200 companies to complete their ESG reporting. So we're in very good hands to hearing from Roy, and he'll talk with us about the challenges and opportunities for listed companies on ESG reporting. So Roy, over to you.
Thank you so much, Professor Lee, for the nice introduction. My name is Roy. Good morning, everybody. And yes, I think I'm very lucky to have the opportunity to work in the climate change area. I think since 2006, where the countries are still debating whether climate change is there or not. Now it's 2021, and we are all talking about climate neutrality now. And I think today we are privileged to share, the latest developments on ESG related matters, and climate change has been one of the leading topics across the ESG issues. And I would like to thank also Dr. Chang, who just shared the importance of disclosure. You see how companies in China has been responding to negative news, and I think today I'm going to touch a little bit on this subject as well. I mean, it's like a two-edged sword. It depends on how you really utilize this tool of disclosure, I think. So to start, I would like to give you just some background about EY, what we have been doing. We have been doing this climate change, ESG, sustainability for over 20 years. Yeah. So our section is actually now aligned and termed as Climate Change and Sustainability Service, or CCAS, and we have 1,400 professionals operating in many countries. And in Asia Pacific area, we have already over 300 professionals. And this is our Asia leader, Judy Lee. She is also a colleague of mine, in the United Nations families before. And she is now leading a team of 30 experts in China to deliver green finance related services, like, most notably green bonds issuance, ESG reportings, etc. And myself, I've been working in these environmental sustainability areas for over 20 years. And I have been, in recent years, focused in ESG reportings, and has helped, I think, over 150 clients to prepare the ESG reports over the last 4 years or so. So I'm excited to be here to share some of the insights. So I'm sure some of you have already heard a lot about ESG, and today I'm going to focus, particularly on the ESG reporting side, the opportunities, the challenges, and some insider view on how to tackle the challenges and make use of the benefits. So I think this is very basic, just to tell you these key components: environmental, social, and governance. And on the environmental side, you have now the most important topic, climate change, carbon emission, and you have the other environmental related topics like energy, water, waste, and wastewater, of course, and the resources. On the middle, you have a set of issues related to social aspects like employment, staff training and development, supply chain, and community investment. On the right side, on the governance, we talked about the management of the company. We talked about shareholder structure, the responsibility and oversight of the board, the salary and incentives and financial policies, risk management, etc. And on the bottom, you have many stakeholders for companies, most notably regulators, investors, employees, shareholders, customers, suppliers, of course. So these give you an overview on the complexity of this issue. And what is ESG reporting? As already highlighted by Professor Chen, company has to disclose to let the investor know what or how they have been performing. And ESG reporting has now gone to a very high level. It's like a very sophisticated mean of disclosing company information. And companies, especially listed companies in Hong Kong and China, has to disclose their information. So here, this slide tells you, the ESG report is now coming together with the traditional annual report, which mainly focus on the financial performance. But actually more and more investors are now asking the integration of this ESG reporting into part of the annual reporting. And this is some examples. This is one of the biggest banks in Hong Kong and the world, disclosing how they tackle climate change, and to give everybody an idea on their policy, their plans, and their actions. And this is another example. This is another bank. You can see they are disclosing their policy in procurement, their standard, and their guide. They have some instrument to govern their practical activities. On the right side, they report how they follow the principles in human rights, health and safety, environmental sustainability, as well as integrity and ethics. So this just to give you an overview on how listed companies and banks, and other companies, including funds, also are trying to tell people how they have been performing. And this is another example. This is Ping An. So they disclose how they manage the issue. You can see on the left side the governance structure that the company said they have been following. It's typical company structure, but you can see clearly the allocation of the roles related to the ESG there. So the board of director, the group executive committee, we call it board committees. And on the third level is more on the office level, and on the L4, the bottom is about the execution and operation levels. So you can see, how they are operating, and you can also have a sense on how good they are currently operating too in ESG. And on the right side, it also discloses how companies are managing their risk, and this gives investors an idea on how detailed or the level of maturity their management in ESG are. So let's talk about some opportunities via ESG reporting. Yeah, I highlighted a few benefits, which of course are not exclusive, exhaustive, and I put in here, when you are good in ESG reporting, disclosing, necessary information, you would be able to maintain your competitiveness. You would be able to, identify your risks and know your risks, and you can track your performance. You can also protect your company reputation, which worried by a lot of companies still. And I'm going to give you some examples. And here, maintaining, this competitiveness. So basically, you can see there are a lot of rating agencies drawing on company information, public information, also news, etc. They try to indicate, the performance of company by some simple means, like a rating, like ABC, like some numerical ratings. So for companies who have used to ESG reporting, they are now very aligned with this reporting matrix that is leading ESG rating companies having, in order for them to be score their performance more efficiently. So for companies that have been going to the route for a long time, they are in a better position, I would say, to help these rating agencies to score. And of course, I mean, at the end, no matter how good your disclosure is, it's always come down to your actual ESG performance. So I'm going to tell you a little bit later, to how to really drive the ESG performance within your company. And here, this is about knowing what kind of material risks or ESG risks are there in your company or in the corporations. So it's called materiality analysis. It is a process, advocated by GRI and other leading standard, the SASB, or called a sustainability assessment standard. They have a kind of materiality matrix, sustainability assessment standard board, SASB. They have a kind of materiality matrix heat map to illustrate, the risk area for various industries. So it is an exercise where stakeholders are involved to find out, the issues, the ESG issues that are important to the companies. The results are normally presented in this manner. On the top right are those critical issues. For Hang Seng Bank, of course, customer privacy and the corruption, financial inclusion. I think it is all very sensible, or making a lot of sense. And surprisingly, on the bottom left is some not relevant issue, which is related to water, effluent and waste. Yeah, maybe it is because it is mainly office-based, so they don't have a lot of footprint in environmental resources. And here, investors have been asking the major companies to disclose. This is an example. I think 1,320 companies have been asked by CDP, via CDP. CDP is called Carbon Disclosure Project in the past. It's a major organization for asking companies for recording the carbon emissions or climate strategy of the companies. So last year, 1,320 companies have been asked, and this includes the major companies shown on the screen. And this is a major force because these investors represent more than 17 trillion in US dollar. So it's a big ask, I would say, for these companies to disclose what the investors think are necessary. So it goes back to the issues that Dr. Chang talked about, the repetition issue. So it is, an issue that every company will have to face. And here, this is a coalition, also asking disclosure not only for the tier 1 suppliers, but also for, other suppliers. So I think this has become a norm slowly, that companies have to be very, very transparent in order to maintain their reputation and be good in their business. And here, this is an example recently that Alibaba has been fined for, around 20 billion, 20 billion renminbi, a heavy fine because of their business strategy. Yeah, it's called some pick one from two strategy. So I think this is not probably too much about ESG reporting, but it's about how you control, how you understand your risk, and how you manage it. And here, just another example of the power of ESG reporting. And here, the famous MSCI ESG rating, CDP, SBTI. These initiatives have been driving companies to disclose in their ESG performance, and their rating has been used as a very useful benchmark to compare companies from companies. So to give you a small conclusion on this section, yes, we all have to pay attention to disclosure, and staying away from it is no longer the answer. I think we now move on to some of the leading standards, leading requirements. That's what I'm trying to say. You cannot hide. And here you can see the leading regulatory requirements on the left. The Hong Kong EX, Hong Kong Exchange requires listed company to report every year. And on the bottom two, the Hong Kong MA is now doing a consultation on the strategic policy manual, asking all these banks or authorized institutions, basically banks and financial institutions, to disclose their climate-related risk and how they are managing it. And the SFC, the Securities and Futures Commissions, have just announced a consultation conclusion and released a circular asking the same, which are all based on the TCFD on the right. Yeah, on the TCFD you see, it's the major driving force by the countries after the Paris Agreement has been ratified. And on top of the TCFD is the GRI standard, which has been used by many companies, thousands of companies around the world to disclose their ESG performance. And here is the Appendix 27, which a lot of you, I think, are familiar with. And now, since last year, the standards have been uplifted to another level for disclosure, mandatory disclosure, actually, on the governance-related information, including board statements, including how they have exercised their oversight. So I think this is really important that the top management are now requested to disclose their participation and leadership. And of course, the new requirements also include climate change, climate risk management as well. And this is what I just talked about. The Hong Kong MA has issued a consultation, I think back in July. And the consultation has been closed, but they are working, on these comments from the stakeholders. It is expected, this climate change, climate risk management will be effective next year for, a disclosure as early as 2023. And so this is something that will be coming up soon. And here, the SFC requirements for fund managers. It is now effective, and the first disclosure will be sometime in August 2022. And it talks about, the disclosure of carbon footprint, the risk to the funds, and also for large funds, they have to apply scenario analysis. So yeah, so you see the landscape has been changed rapidly. And here, just to give you an idea on the GRI standard, on the left side, the figures, the GRI 101 is like the basic principles. And 102, 103 is some guidelines on how the management could approach their disclosure according to specific nature of the companies. And on the bottom, the 200, 300, 400 series are, directed to the individual aspect, economic, environmental, and social aspect on various industries. So it is a very comprehensive guidelines and is still developing. So here, this is what I mentioned, TCFD. It starts after the Paris Agreement, the G20 meeting. There is a Financial Stability Board who proposed, that financial institutions will have the duty and they will be vulnerable to climate risk. And therefore, now, 2021 now, basically most of the major companies, financial institutions in the world have been following these disclosure standards. And the 4 pillars we call it, including governance, strategy, risk management, matrix, and targets, have all been utilized by major regulators like Hong Kong EX, Hong Kong MA, and SEC. So they are all talking about the same thing. So for the interest of time, I would like to just move on to the challenges from a practitioner's perspective. Yeah. So in order to get very valuable information across, there are a lot of challenges. For companies in the past, the goals, of course, are to make money for the stakeholders. Yeah, and I think nobody would argue that. But we have seen a change in the roles of the companies. Basically, investors, stakeholders, the society are asking for more, and also the employees, especially the millennium, generation we call it, they ask for the purpose. So a lot of companies have been very proactive in engaging their employees so that they can keep them, so that they can work together more effectively. And here on this slide, I display some of the common issues that we've seen, why companies are not doing or are not investing good enough in ESG and reporting. And on the top side, because traditional performances indicators are particularly financial ones, are very short term, and ESG attributes tends to be longer terms, and that's why sometimes ESG are easily overlooked. Yeah. On the right side, the fiduciary duty. Yeah. Sometimes financial returns again are very high on the agenda, and a lot of companies are putting ESG as externality. Yeah. So they don't really see ESG influencing their financial performance. On the bottom, yeah, ESG reporting is very complex. If you are not paying attention to it, you sometimes are lost. You cannot really find out what interests or stakeholders are interested with. And so a lot of companies are using the tick box approach, just following the templates, following some of the guidelines. So I think it's time to move on to make your own reports to be more specific. And companies, especially during the pandemic, they learned a lot about ESG because the pandemic caused for a lot of immediate responses. For example, supply chain is blocked. What can you do? Employees cannot go to the office. You cannot talk to your clients. You cannot go to your client offices. A lot of changes. So a lot of companies are now paying more and more attention to the meaning of ESG and try to find the opportunities there. You know, for example, a lot of AI-based companies, they jump to a very high performance because, you know, during the pandemic, this electronic means of business have become the mainstream, for example. So everybody can make use of the opportunity, and ESG is now the main theme. So, yeah, one of the other problem is the shortages in ESG expertise, and probably you can find in, you know, the job market. It's all about ESG, climate change, sustainability. Yeah, so I won't. Yeah, and indeed, it is very difficult to hire experienced ESG expertise now. And I'll give you an example here. Only 29% has ESG expertise across the Fortune 100 board directors. Yeah, so still a long way to go. And here, the data challenges, as I said before, ESG covers so many different aspects. So all the data are dispersed in silos, and sometimes you do not know who is responsible in your company for those data and information. And when you get those data, if you are not having good quality control, well, I don't know whether you can trust those data yourself. And also the investors, the stakeholders are also asking more and more information. For example, a carbon portfolio, carbon footprint, for example, you know, climate risk, impact. So yeah, these all combine to the difficulties in giving you data. But understand nowadays a lot of data houses are working very hard to come up with this, you know, investment grade data. Yeah. So some small recommendations before I close. You know, I think it's time to get ready because the regulators are after you. They're all after the TCFD recommendations because the Hong Kong government, I think Rocky will tell you a little bit more. You know, Hong Kong government is aiming to turn Hong Kong as a green finance center. And on the right side, yeah, putting ESG report on the board level will be the key to give you the right resource, attention, and responsibility, the power, you know. On the bottom, yeah, you need to integrate the ESG functions into your finance function in order to work effectively. And finally, my point is to seek governance to ensure your data are robust and trustworthy. And here, you know, just a process-wise flowchart, how, you know, you could integrate the ESG management into your corporations, from, you know, the top management to level setting, to assessment of risk, to integration, and then to disclosure. And this is the final. I think more and more companies, especially those international companies, have been using assurance more and more. Yeah, so to help them to verify their report data. So I'm closing. I now pass the time back to Professor Lee. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Roy, for the excellent share. I think you covered a lot of different topics, including the question on talent. And I saw that in the audience there was a question on talent. And just for your information, on the agenda, we'll have later on opportunity for the speakers to address the Q&A. And I have a short panel in the form of a fireside chat with Roy and Rocky. But before we get there, I would like to introduce everyone to Dr. Rocky Tone. So Rocky is a director and the head of policy research at the Financial Services Development Council, which is focusing on helping Hong Kong as a financial center. But Rocky will share more about it. But also to share Rocky's prior experience he's been a former director of capital markets policy at the CFA Institute. He has been a senior economist at the Hong Kong General Chamber of Commerce and has been focusing a lot on he can share a bit more around the macro environment, especially also now COP26 is coming upon us, so the topic is very relevant. We can talk a bit more around the talent question as well, and maybe for a lot of us, it's increasingly important. What's Hong Kong's role in the bigger ESG picture? So we're really looking forward to your presentation, Rocky, and hope you enjoyed your marathon a couple of days ago.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you everyone for dialing in and listening to the presentation. I was very excited earlier this morning listening to Professor Chang and Roy's presentation. I learned a lot from them, and hopefully I can offer a little bit of insight in the upcoming 30 minutes or so. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Hong Kong's readiness for the rise of ESG. There are two, very important message here. So the rise of ESG is almost taken as a given, in this title. And then, we are going to take a look at how Hong Kong is ready, or whether we are ready for this. And I think the answer to this self-nominated question is an affirmative yes. So here, let me, for those of you who are not too familiar with the FSDC, we are a high-level cross-sectoral advisory body to the Hong Kong SAR government, established by the government back in 2013. Based on the very fact that in Hong Kong, we have different very good regulators, such as the Hong Kong Monetary Authority regulating banking related activities, the Securities and Futures Commission regulating securities related functions, then, the Insurance Authority regulating insurance related matters. However, there's no advisory body covering matters in relation to all of these and functions in between, such as accounting, legal related matters. And so FSDC was established back in 2013 for that very specific purpose. We have three major objectives. One of those would be the policy research functions, of which we take pride of. Over the years, we have put forward, recommendations for the government and regulators' consideration, and a lot of those have been taken into account. The other two functions are namely market development, market promotion. We do not only carry such functions here locally, but also do it in overseas market and in the mainland market. Last but not the least, a human capital development is something that is, very dear to our heart. For that, the financial services industry cannot thrive without talent. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here speaking to students and alumni of PolyU, trying to make use of this presence and see how we can collaborate even further. There's one point here, the 100+ industry experts. We do not only, we have a very small office, and our office only contains no more than 20 staff members. However, we do, have the privilege of reaching out to very prominent figures in the industry. And so, through this exercise, we would be, aware of how, the markets are moving and trends and regulations. And so, tapping on the expertise of these professionals is a very important privilege that we do contain. I'm not going to go through these slides. So delving into the very specific topic of why sustainable finance or ESG investment is important. This is a start, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the global landscape to begin with. At the end of this week, it's not only a matter of Halloween, where we all dress up as funny characters. Here in the UK, we are going to see the start of a very important event, and that is COP26. This is an important event, but it is not the first. So it's already the 26th conference that aims to deal with climate-related issues. But this is very important because first, there are a lot more emphasis by the industry as well as global leaders on climate change. And from, like you can see that people are not talking about climate change anymore. And some of these newspapers and, like leading media agencies, they're calling climate crisis. Like making such changes is very prominent because, a lot of these media outlets have been around for ages, like decades, if not, like centuries. So, like for these, companies to call it a climate crisis, not a climate change and phenomena, is something big. So, like this is a sign to show that, like the society does take it very seriously. And we do also recognize that during the next week or next 10, actually 13 days, we are going to see, like a lot of discussions around how the financial services sector is going to contribute to the better good or, like refinement of how we frame this matter and, like offering solutions to such questions or problems. So this is another thing that we're going to say. And last but not the least, since I've mentioned at the outset that this is already the 26th conference, we have to agree on the actions to be taken following the previous conferences. So as a result, this, this slide is, a highlight of what, the industry has done, since the previous sessions. And this is a map showing how, like economies and markets and countries around the world have committed to the carbon neutrality, like since, the last very important conference. And we can see here that over 130 economies and markets have already committed to it. On the left-hand side, you can see that some of those are more aggressive. Their carbon neutrality pledge is before 2050, so that they are the ones to applaud. On the right-hand side, we see countries and markets that are, like committed to carbon neutrality as well, but they are relatively less aggressive in terms of their target. But the bulk of it, we're quite happy to see that over 130 countries have committed to the plan to reach carbon neutrality soon. So as following on the last slide, on this slide, we can see that 137 countries have committed to carbon neutrality. Most are centered around 2050. And then, like we are also seeing some other, like goals and pledges. And for Hong Kong, like while the country of China is, committing to the 2060 carbon neutrality plan. Here in Hong Kong, given the very fact that we are not a heavy industrial economy, we do, rely mostly on, services to service our economy. That is one of the key reasons why we are attaching to commit to, the carbon neutrality by 2050. And we did see some plans coming through. I may not have, highlighted it in this presentation, but then, like just dig it up. The government has released something earlier this month, and that would be something to, not bad time reading, but like you will benefit a lot from reading it. Now on this slide, we can see that this is a global trend. Like it's not about talking the talk, but walking the walk as well. Walking the talk as well. So here it's a slide on the left-hand side. You can see how sustainable investment is representing a higher share in terms of proportion, as well as the aggregate number of assets or amount of assets or globally. So in 2020, we have around investable assets of around $100 trillion US. among which 35% or around 35 trillion US dollars was in sustainable assets. All right. Back in 2012, we it's just around ballpark around well, I would say 24% of the assets was investing in sustainable related vehicles. So you can see that in both in terms of share as well as the aggregate number has increased. So that this is quite telling because like investors tend to be at the forefront of where trends are. And so like this is telling us that investors have a nose for this, and then they are investing more in sustainable vehicles. On the right hand side, this is something quite similar to what I was explaining, so I'm not going to delve into it. Now, why like the investors' interest in such assets is very important is because first, they are the ones directing where the money should go, and then, for instance, if they are investing in a company, then they would have more say on how the company management would think about certain issues. So investors are extremely important, like in the entire value chain, so to speak. And even though retail investors are very important, even though the institutional investors are very important, they are also the ones soliciting money or like receiving investments from retail investors. So that kind of logic would make us to take a look at how retail investors are in general acceptable to the idea of sustainable investing. So this is a chart not generated by us, but by CFA Institute. You can see that, like over the years, there's an increase over the past 2 years. There's an increase in retail investors' interest in ESG in various markets. Yeah, and specifically in Hong Kong, we can see quite a significant jump from 71% to 86%. I think the percentage may not be very meaningful, but the share or the increase is very prominent. You can take a look at how like even in the other markets, the very general trend of upward movement in terms of retail investor interest is quite telling, for the very fact that it's telling us perhaps the asset managers, asset owners, and the other banks and insurance companies are doing a very good job in like gathering the interest and like making it something of interest to retail investors too. So even though the institutional investors are the ones who are at the forefront, they have successfully introduced this concept of like ESG investment to the retail investors. This is just a slide showing how investors and institutional investors, as well as banks and other financial institutions, are delving a lot of resources and prominence to the issue of green and sustainable finance. We can see that like the ESG job market is also heating up as a result of how like the financial market is getting hyped up. And I'm aware that there are a lot of students in the audience, so I think this is quite useful to know. This may not be something that is represented enough, but we do feel that it is a good benchmark. Take a look at how LinkedIn is showing such data that like back in the days we did not see many of the job titles in related to ESG, so to speak. But then we can see that there's a skyrocketing kind of trend over the past few years. So this is telling us that well, students, like this is something you should be aware of, and like it's not only just for your own for your interest per se, but then this will be something that you're going to potentially be working as your professional career, professional career. Well, there are a lot of like job or employers in the space of ESG, and then you can see that like who those are. By the way, like in one of our recent studies, we have identified that students in universities tend not to, comparing to fintech, they're not as excited or knowledgeable about ESG. I guess, like, and this is one of the key roles for the other stakeholders in Hong Kong to bring it to the students. So, I really appreciate the invitation from Professor Chan to this webinar. Now, like in Asia, we also see that, like one of the key vehicles people are using or at least as a benchmark would be the issuance of green bonds, in the region. And so over the years, take a look at the chart on the left-hand side, you can see that Europe has always been a leader in green bond issuance, all right? Always a leader. But the share of it may have come down somewhat. It is not because the European countries are not issuing as much green bond. It has been, like as a matter of fact, increasing in terms of the aggregate number, in terms of the volume. But it is the other parties or the other regions growing as well. So this is conducive, or this is a positive note for all of us who are supportive of this movement, because we can see that other regions such as North America, such as like here in the Asia Pacific region, we are seeing a more upbeat momentum. As for like countries in this region, I think mainland China is like contributing a lot to this number. For that, it's the #1 country in this region in terms of green bond issuance. Well, coming to this, like it sounds almost like I'm a salesperson selling you the idea of ESG, but no, my role is to be an advisor to the government, and like that's why besides the opportunities and goodies that this may come along, I have to also highlight the challenges and potentially what has to be changed for such challenges. So in terms, and this slide really summarizes the challenges that we have seen and heard from our friends from the industry. Generally, is the absence of a globally consistent corporate reporting standard, which I guess Roy has highlighted. And the lack of comparable data is something quite, like sitting quite high on the challenge list. For instance, take a look at, a prominent global investors who not only invest in Hong Kong, but also in Japan, in mainland China, and in Australia. Yeah. So if the reporting standard is quite different across these 4 markets, then it would be quite difficult for these global investors to apply the same metric and like framework in their analyses and deciding what assets and what amount of assets should be allocated to which market and whatnot. So this is a challenge. Then on the right hand side is the lack of understanding and incentives for the private sector to incorporate ESG factors into the business model. So let me highlight this to you. For instance, you can think of this as the private sector being, say, the listed company. If they are to be asked to provide the ESG reports on an annual basis. They would have to go to service providers such as Roy's employer, and then to them it is an added cost. But if they don't see the real benefits behind it, and they will, well, then they will see it as only a cost center, a cost metric. Then this is no good. Yeah, this is not going to make people thinking about it day and night. It's just an afterthought. So this is for the private sector to address, but it is also for the public sector to educate and to provide certain incentive, so that they, at least at the outset or at the very beginning stage, they will understand why this is important to them. Then is the shortage of skills and understanding in the area. I think, as I mentioned, like people, students, or people who are already in the field and students in school, you guys should be taking a look at thinking about enhancing your skills in and understanding in the subject of sustainability, ESG, investment, and related sector and matters. Last but not the least, ESG and green and sustainable finance is a very broad-ranging and stringent regulatory approach. And it really takes time to incorporate. And that is really relevant to what I mentioned earlier. You need to get a buy-in from the private sector. And through the, these engagement exercise, you have to mobilize the service provider on the upstream and also the customers on the downstream. And so, one has to adopt a very holistic approach in order to get everybody to buy into this. So these would be the common challenges. Luckily, like here in Hong Kong, we have done quite a bit. Thanks a lot to the government and relevant stakeholders, such as the regulators, as well as the stock exchange. Obviously, the private sector presence is also very important. And that, like this map here really maps out how important these people are and these stakeholders are, and the roles in this. So let me group the first three parts into the category of private sector. Asset owners, such as endowment funds, pension funds, insurance companies, for their presence here, and if they buy into the idea of a green and developing our economies in a green and sustainable manner, then like they would direct the asset managers to manage their assets in a green and sustainable way. So this is the value chain. Asset owners are the ones directing how asset managers would be, executing their investment strategies. Asset owners don't tend not to deal directly with the companies, but they do this through the engagement with the asset managers. So this is how you see the flow, yeah. So this is how we are going to mobilize the assets through the mobilization of assets, and affect the behavior of the invested companies. Here in Hong Kong, we pride ourselves as the global leading IPO fund center, and we really are. For the past 12 years, we ranked #1 for 7 of those 12 years. And so, we can see that a lot of new and huge companies are coming to be listed here in Hong Kong, thanks to the wonderful services the stock exchange has been offering. And so besides this, besides attracting them to be listed here, we have to make sure that these companies also comply with the requirement of the ESG disclosure requirement. We don't only want them to do it, we don't want them to do it well as well. So this is what the Hong Kong Stock Exchange has been doing. And Hong Kong Stock Exchange, even though it is a listed company, it also functions as a regulator on the other hand. So that really brings me to the next topic, the presence of the government and financial regulators. They are adopting a carrot and stick approach. Like I mentioned earlier, like if you only penalize, which is like teaching your son or daughter, you can't just beat them up when they are young, and ask them to study And this is not the right approach. By the way, like child beating is not permissible, in any country. So this is joking aside, like we believe that this is really, really important to provide some carrots to encourage such private sector stakeholders to like give more attention to the right things that we want them to have attention to. So this is something that we see here in Hong Kong, but the presence of good academics, civil society organizations such as Friends of the Earth and the other professional bodies. They are like the previous employer of Roy and a team leader here in Asia, UN. Like these organizations are going to make a change and make a difference too. In terms of the summary of this page is that we in Hong Kong do have the privilege of having major presence of all these 5 key stakeholders on the map. And in terms of our offering or performance, I'm not going to go too much into details, but we can see that Hong Kong has been like a venue for like green bond issuance, not only for local companies such as like those conglomerates which I don't intend to name here in Hong Kong, but also for companies coming from the other countries and markets. And we also have the MDB, in the middle column, you can see MDB is the multilateral development banks. Yeah. So we can see that the European Investment Bank has also issued, is a frequent issuer, by the way, coming to Hong Kong and issuing such green bonds. So with the comprehensive ecosystem that we offer and hold, we are attracting a lot of interest from corporates and issuers at home and abroad. The chief executive has given much emphasis on the government led by the chief executive has given much emphasis on green and sustainable matters. So besides what was mentioned, like in the policy address 2020-2021. We also see that a lot of measures have been introduced. One of those would be, besides the others, I would like to highlight that like the Hong Kong Quality Assurance Agency, HKQAA, has been offering quite a full-fledged certification program and services to potential issuers. This is very important, and because not only do they offer the services, and they are also administering the grant scheme, which provides incentives for potential issuers to choose Hong Kong over the other markets. So HKQAA, if you want to be connected, feel free to shoot me an email sometime. Otherwise, just reach out to HKQAA. They have very, very collaborative and helpful colleagues. There are other things that are highlighted too. I would like to mention that green and sustainable finance, if we want to do this well, we need to have a very good coordination across various stakeholders. Go back to the map that I mentioned earlier. There are private sector stakeholders, there are public sector stakeholders, and we need to have very good collaboration among all of them. Okay. And we have to start with the public sector first, because this is a matter, a cross-cutting matter, a cross-cutting subject that brings about not only financial services industry, but also say the Environment Bureau. So that type of coordination needs to be in place. And with that in mind, last year in May, the government has set up this cross-agency steering group. And so, like the members are on the left-hand side, but, even though the FSDC is not a member, we have the privilege of, knowing some of those key regulators and working very closely with them on various matters. And so what they intend to do, what they are doing, and, what they have done these are the things that we at the FSDC are very mindful of and aware of. And as for the next steps, we can see that there's enhancement in different areas. So there are, for instance, in terms of reporting and disclosure, there's a work stream undertaken by the Green and Sustainable Finance Cross-Agency Steering Group to investigate how best we can take this forward from this point in time. Then we also see a lot of discussion around carbon market opportunities. Yeah, we know for a fact that in Guangzhou we now have a carbon exchange, and so how Hong Kong can potentially take part in this, or whether we should be taking part in this, is also in discussion. And last but not the least, this is the private-public sector collaboration within the cross-agency steering group. A Center for Green and Sustainable Finance has been established, and working group members come from the civil society and as well as the private sector. So I would encourage you to take a look at the announcements made in July this year by the cross-agency steering group, and you will have a better understanding of where and the direction of the steering group. Not going to talk too much into this, but different regulators have done various things for to put the agenda forward. I would like to highlight that Hong Kong Monetary Authority carrying out its function not only as the financial regulator or the banking regulator, is also the asset manager, or is also the huge asset owner. So in this announcement in 2019, it has already pledged to dish out a higher degree of mandates to asset managers who are incorporating ESG strategies in their investment. So this is how Hong Kong is incentivizing the asset managers to devote more resources to relevant investment. So I'll keep it at that. Besides the regulators, like I mentioned, the other segments are also the other participants are also participating in this very interesting journey. Talking about FSDC, I'm mindful of time. There are 4 particular papers that we have put forward. One of those was back in 2016 when nobody was putting as much attention to this subject back then. So we advised the government on, being a leader in issuing green bonds that would subsequently incentivize the banks and product owners to think more about this product. And so, a lot of these, this is just one of those recommendations, but a lot of those, as you can see, from a retrospective perspective, a lot of these have been taken on board already. Then in 2018, we shift our focus from focusing on green only to ESG strategy. So I must confess that, in Asian countries are a little bit behind, if not quite behind the curve, comparing to economies in Europe, especially those in Europe, really. So we back in 2018, we were really learning from the knowledgeable ones and seeing that in Europe and in the US, this was already a big trend. And so now Hong Kong being the leading international financial center in this part of the world, we have to do something. And then these would be the recommendations put forth in our paper. And again, a lot of them have been taken on board by the regulators and the government. We did a follow-on study last year Many policies are still work in progress, but this is very, very interesting. I think, like the ESG policy roadmap is something that we have been advocating, and we do believe it is necessary, because we can not only come up with the world-shocking idea, but there's no implementation details. So I guess the policy roadmap with milestones would be something that we need to work on. And with that in mind, as a matter of fact, the FSDC is also, like conducting a similar, relevant study in this matter, on this subject, actually. Okay, this is a relatively new report that I mentioned in my presentation earlier. I want to highlight that, like ESG and fintech are the emerging trends. And they are in our everyday life. And like these relevant jobs are available abundantly in the market. So for students and interested parties in the field, you guys should be looking for ways to enhance your knowledge, skills, and experience in such regard. And so we have put forward some of the recommendations for the government's consideration. Some of them were already reflected in the policy address, by the way, but others, like will work very closely with the government and interested parties going forward. And I guess that would end. That would come to an that would bring an end to my presentation. But I look forward to our discussion later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rocky. I think it was very interesting content, also testament to what we're seeing in the number of participants. We still have around 180 participants. I think over the last week, we got a lot of questions from the audience. The content was very interesting. I think in the upcoming next 30 minutes panel with Dr. Cheng, with Roy, and Dr. Tong, I want to group the question a bit into 3 categories. The people category, covering the talent question, the ownership and accountability of directors, maybe the remuneration. I want to talk a bit more about the process, the ESG ratings divergence, and I want to talk a bit at the end around data and technology in terms of how to integrate data, the combination of fintech in helping drive some of the sustainable development goals. So maybe let's start with talent. I know Rocky already talked a lot about talent, so I'll look at Roy to maybe share a bit about Roy. So in a professional services firm like EY, can you share a bit around how you are building or reskilling your talent in the organization to prepare servicing the financial institutions, the non-financial institutions? Can you share a bit how you do that? Because I understand that for professional services, we have SOX, we are having IFRS, and ESG is a big focus for you. Can you share a bit for our audience to understand how you're preparing your talent or gathering your talent?
Thanks, Professor Lee. I think I just give a quick overview on the actions that we have been doing. Yes, I think, well, being in the industry for 20 years, in the past, I think the environmental or sustainability area or field has always been regulatory driven or compliant driven. So I think I consider, my first job, which is a kind of environmental consulting, working on EIA, environmental consultancy back in 1997. And it was all because of the government's request for big companies like MTRC, the power companies, they all have to comply some of the requirements before the projects, like the Lantau Expressway, to move on, to proceed. So it's all very business lacking, in the process, because on its own, this expertise in environmental quality and things like that, they cannot generate revenue itself. Doing good to clean the air does not give you some money back. So because of restrictions in defining, the value of the environmental resources, for example. Yeah. So, but as long as there is a need and there will be a service, and we've seen the needs are coming from the world's demand, because of the degrading environmental quality and now the climate change. We've seen the legislator putting forward a lot of regulations to request companies and individuals to comply, and that comes the band of professionals that can provide the services. And of course, there are many good people, without these regulations, they will also do the same thing, but the proportion are very little. So I think going back to my company, we have been, asking by a lot of clients recently because of the latest regulations in finance. And back in a few years ago, because of the Hong Kong Exchange ESG reporting requirements. And that's why, from the start, we are recruiting, we are building, and we are transforming, people according to the developments of the regulations. But for some of the people with my background, for example, who work for some international organization who may seem a little bit further on how the direction will go, these companies will tend to prepare beforehand, to train and recruit beforehand a set of people so they can offer the service before other people. But currently, what we are doing, we are trying to recruit, those people that have the environmental background, because the history of environmental professionals have been much longer than ESG and climate change. And most of the matrices, especially those database matrices are more inclined towards environmental. And therefore, in the past and right now also, with people who has strong environmental backgrounds will have the benefits to become the next professional in climate change and ESG. And we basically absorb all of them because of the skill sets, and we have employed relatively little on people who have business background or non-science background. Engineering, of course, can be qualified because of their background. So I will stop here. So maybe Rocky, who has done a study in the need in the environmental professionals in Hong Kong, can give you some insights too, I think.
Yeah. I'll just add quickly. I think Roy is the practitioner who is on the job and hiring a lot. We at the same time have been talking to a lot of other employers, and not only in the financial services providers, but also banks and other insurance firms, asset managers, and others. So basically, these people are all, or these firms are effectively all hiring students of all type. But there's one particular thing that was important in our finding, and that is the collaborative and the interdisciplinary mindset that one should have. So of course, engineers are very good at thinking of ways to make the buildings greener, and the carbon emission and whatnot would be reduced. But at the same time, I think is the communication part is also very important, because it may be too general, but the observation could be that some engineers may not be as good in communicating the ideas with the top management as well as the general public. So for engineers, I think some engineers, maybe they want to brush up their communication skills. At the same time, for people who are already really good at communication, they may need to take some courses offered by, say, PolyU and the other universities.
Thanks for sharing that, Rocky. No, I fully agree with your point on the interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary nature of skills sought after in professionals. Maybe also interesting to share from our side, we're planning to have an ESG master in our accounting and finance program to also provide those skills. And as you are saying about the articulation, the communication part, we do that as well. A little bit advertised for it. We do that also with fintech for people to understand when they get employed, they understand what is the various lingo concept that are being used. Though you may not be this deep expert into that. So I think probably needless to say, there is a lot of opportunity for good talent to skill, develop, train themselves, a lot of demand in the market. So Roy,
Yeah.
did you want to add
Yes.
something? Yeah.
I think, I think I've missed to provide just, the latest situation. I think as market practitioner, we have been struggling to get the right amount and people with the necessary expertise. We are last week just come together and discuss what we need in the next 4 years, and we expect there will be a 2 times, if not 1 time, increase in the demand. This is basically driven by what Walkie and myself has shown, the activities, the action by the SFC and the Hong Kong MA. So to put that simple, I think people who has some risk management experience for climate change and some corporate management experience on how to integrate ESG or climate risk into their management would be the hot picks in the next few years.
Great. No, definitely. I do see that ESG capabilities are more and more seen as a proxy for the governance strengths, risk management capabilities, and also operational resilience of firms. I maybe want to ask a question to Dr. Zheng as well, from an academic side, from a research perspective. Can you share a bit about what you're seeing there in terms of a push into more ESG, CSR related research? Dr. Zheng?
Yes. So, ESG was not traditionally an accounting or finance topic. Okay, until recently, everyone is working on ESG issues. It is a hot topic. When I worked in UK, in Manchester, actually, almost all of my colleagues, were working on ESG. And then when I moved to Hong Kong, this is the same case. So actually, I think the main challenge is that, we are aware that ESG is important. It may affect firm value. It may affect the investment, decision. So actually, there are some, mutual funds or institutional investors are paying increasing attention to ESG issues when they are forming portfolio. But from our perspective, the key challenge is how to assess a firm's real ESG performance. Because a main obstacle on this issue is that the ESG performance is usually evaluated based on the firm's own disclosure, right? And the firms may have incentives to manipulate their ESG information. They may disproportionately disclose good news and hiding bad news. Okay, so this is the so-called greenwashing or blue washing. Okay, and we're aware that in some countries like US or EU, they are developing some regulations in order to crack down the so-called greenwashing. As far as we know, in US, they have climate and development task force in the division of enforcement, and in EU they recently developed a regulation called Sustainability Finance Disclosure Regulation, and the purposes of these regulations is to crack down the greenwashing behavior. So I think this is quite important. Without revealing the true ESG performance of the company, the investors and the capital market participants might be misled. And then this may lead to inefficient capital allocation. Yeah.
Got it. No, that's a very good point around disclosures, and also me as an investor the trust in the data that is being provided by the company, which leads me maybe to the next part of the people process technology. Maybe I want to talk a bit around the ESG ratings, and there were questions in the audience as well around it. I mean, we're seeing probably with some of the asset managers, they tend to use companies like MSCI, Sustainalytics, or Moody's VE. For example, there are different parties out there, and I think in academic research, we've seen divergence of the outcome for one and the same company due to the scope of the ESG rating, the measurement, and the different weighting. Anything from you, Roy, or from Dr. Zhang around where we are getting from here, having these different ratings, having companies use their own models, and any thoughts how people can deal with that? I know that a lot of companies are using second-party opinions as well. And anything from you, Roy, or after that, Dr. Zhang, or maybe Rocky, of course, if you have any.
Yep. Thank you very much. I think, yeah, I see the question, and I heard Professor Zhang's comment about, manipulation. I mean, this term is really, something. I think I don't see any company is not manipulating their information. I mean, they have to really, put the information in a manner that, are in line or addressing their stakeholders' expectation, I think. So some form of manipulation would definitely be there. But I think Dr. Zhang is meaning some other meaning. So going back to the question, I think let me describe some, the normal processes where, these rating agencies are operating, yes, they normally based on the public information like ESG reports and news as well, but they also have a very comprehensive process. Some of them, like MSCI, CDP, Sustainalytics, etc. They will send you a questionnaire. You can ask all the big companies, ask their ESG personnel. I mean, every year around the summertime, they would cry like crazy, because all these rating agencies, they would send a request for information, basically in a form of questionnaire. And these questionnaire consists of so many detailed questions. I mean, some of the questions are designed in a way that you deem would fail yourselves if you are not putting in faithfully your information faithfully. So maybe question one asks you some playing information, but afterwards, the question afterwards are back checking, the authenticity and whether your answers are genuine. So, I mean, it has come a long way. We interviewed Morningstar just 2 days ago, one of the biggest data provider. And they acquired Sustainalytics last year, I think, because there is a big demand in climate risk data. And you and I know to put climate risk into numerical value, it is so difficult because of the various climate risks. So I think it's a process where companies are working to find the trustworthy information. I mean, all these rating agencies, they are independent. They don't work for the companies. They work more on, towards the investors or their clients, which are, individuals who are seeking some genuine information. Yeah. So they don't have a conflict of interest with companies. So they don't need to help them, in a way. So, but I think it's a process being developed and going to more and more robust and detailed manners. So what I want to say is every year, these rating agencies, practitioners, they go into these companies, they ask very sensitive questions, and they have people there guaranteeing what they are reporting are genuine. So I think, you really need to give some respect to those people who try to give you the facts. Yeah. And on the, on my notes also at the end, I ask, I challenge everyone who are managing this business to go for assurance. I think, financial assurance has been a long history, and now it has become something that we consider credible. And I think ESG has to go, in this direction. And in fact, the biggest organization in standard setting, in financial reporting, they come together last year, they form a board, IFRS, they form a sustainability board, they elected the chairman, and they are rolling out a common standard next year, which assurance has been one of the 3 key pillars along climate change and materiality. So I think we are getting there, but just have to give it some time. Yeah, thanks.
Now we covered the people side, let's say the process rating side. Maybe talk a little around data and technology. I mean, Larry Fink also recently mentioned that he thinks that the next 1,000 fintech startups will focus on, well, green tech, sustain tech. So that's an interesting point. There was a question from the audience whether there is a way that technology can integrate macro company data into the financial audits. I don't know whether Roy or maybe Rocky, have you seen anything in terms of technology being used? Maybe that's a broader question to help address sustainable development goals. Roy or Rocky, any thoughts on that?
Okay, maybe I can have a go. So yes, absolutely. There are some homegrown companies doing it, and there are some global companies doing it. One of those that I can think about is a local company utilizing AI to look into, well, it's almost a text mine, just text mining. You may be aware that in mainland China there are a lot of provinces, cities, rural. Yes, exactly. A lot of companies, the different levels of information and courts and whatnot, right? And so this company would grabs the information from all these courts and other regulatory actions, and then they will come up with some useful information for their subscribers, so that they can get a sense of how the supply chain, how green, or like how good the governance is the supply chain. As for the global company that I was mentioning, is also using some sort of AI. At the same time, like is adopting the satellite kind of like satellite kind of map. And so you will get to know how close your factory is to the river, and so like how much risk you're exposed to as a result of, say, like flooding, as a result of flooding. So these are some of the examples that I can think of at this juncture.
No, thanks for sharing that. I mean, just also to share, recently also developed a ESG data and technology framework, trying to summarize a bit how different types of fintech can help address the data question. So, I mean, if you look at it visually, you would start at how do you use the Internet of Things, satellites, to get data from the external environment? How do you use blockchain to then disseminate those data tokens, all the way from using your standard AI and robotics to create dashboards, reports, ratings, so to say. But then also from a group, so that would be sort of a get information from the environment part to creating financial products, the likes of, I think you mentioned as well, Rocky, green bonds, tokenization of green bonds to get more people to access these financial products. And maybe at the end also to look at one's ESG footprint using wearables or other devices, etc. So I think there's a lot we can do combining these two topics, ESG and fintech as well. I think another question I want to talk a little bit about is around ESG shareholder activism. I think probably over the first half of this year, there have been still a lot of shareholder activism, shareholders going to proxy fights, and we are seeing more and more of these parties using ESG as a rationale. So for example, we've seen early in the year, what was it, engine number one winning a proxy battle at Shell using, ExxonMobil using ESG reasons. We are seeing currently a company talking with Shell about, can you split yourself into a company that focus on, let's say, traditional energy and then renewables. I think that's also, is any one of your three seeing any developments around ESG activism, the shareholders, employees becoming, let's say, louder, more vocal? Anything to share on from that stakeholder perspective? Could be employees, activist shareholders. Anything to share?
Perhaps, I can take a look at, it's a little bit beyond environmental issues.
Sure.
But then, like you may be aware that in the US, Facebook's a former employee actually filed a lawsuit and made quite a case as to how the company was putting, the company's profits ahead of the well-being of the audience or the users. So while this may not be related to environment, it is somewhat related to governance as well as and more so related to social issues. So I think that you will be seeing, and well, since ESG is becoming such a popular topic, and I'm sure cases like that will become more frequent, like under the radar.
No, thanks for that sharing. If there's nothing from Roy or Dr. Zhang, I might want to ask another question from the audience, which is around, so definitely large companies have a lot of resources to work on ESG. But what about this? Maybe that's more for Roy, from your experience in the practice. What do you see the smaller companies, how should they get prepared with probably limited resources to still comply, or maybe not just beyond compliance? How can they, well, leverage ESG for their brand building, PR narrative to their stakeholders? Any practical advice, 2 or 3 points, Roy, you can share with the audience?
Thanks very much, Professor Lee. I think, yes, we advocate to a lot of companies, that they need to work on ESG, and we highlight the opportunities. Yeah, for example, during the pandemic situation, those companies, they may not be big, but they can capitalize on the opportunities. With a computer, with their expertise, with their services, they can readily go market. And a lot of so-called restriction in the past, like a big office, like a big brand, other conditions that people think big companies needs to have before a successful business is, no longer valid, I think, And going back to what is needed to be successful in ESG, yeah. I think it doesn't really require a lot of resources from the start. I mean, first of all, the management needs to understand what are they dealing with, yeah, and that's my topic. You have to carry out some sort of maturity analysis. You can ask your people. I mean, you can ask some expert, and you can review yourselves and look at what is going on in the world, and you'll find what matters to you. And obviously during the pandemic situation, logistics is a big concern. Communication is a big concern, as well as how to bring across your services to those people who are interested is a big concern. So it really depends on how you find your opportunities. And to me, the best start would be to do good to your people. Whether you are a big company, whether you're a small company, you listen to them. you give them good care, you know, via good governance, good social aspects, you know, like day-to-day, you know, health and safety during the pandemic situation, you know, whether you're giving them masks, whether you're giving them the freedom to work at home and avoid some traffic, you know, whether you are providing good training. You know, whenever your colleagues see you are good to them, and your colleagues see that this company is having a vision, this company is doing good to the society, you know, they will commit. They will not easily say, okay, I'm doing my own thing and the company works in the other direction. So ESG talks about a lot on, you know, caring your employees, and that doesn't mean the privilege of the big companies. Yeah, of course, big companies, they may have some spare resource in doing some, you know, community investment maybe, or, you know, some improvement measures to save resources, to improve efficiency, for example. But ESG is so big that you can always find your action path. And it's never too late to start and to tell your people that, yeah, you care the employees' benefits, you care about the societies, you care about, you know, what you are doing. Yeah, so that's, I think, my experience. Yeah, you're never too late and you're never too small to start.
Got it. No, thanks for sharing that. It actually resembles a lot of the discussion I had with Rocky on another diversity and inclusion panel earlier last week. Maybe last question from me before I see whether we have more questions from the audience is around how do we integrate long-term ESG performance to executive compensation? How do we drive the desired behavior from executive and non-executive director? I know it's not an easy question, but I think definitely one that would be interesting. Any views from any of you gentlemen on that? I see Roy, open your mic.
Yeah, I think let me have a go first before maybe other speakers. Yeah, through the journey of, you know, integrating ESG or climate risk into companies, we have interacting with a lot of companies. You know, we come across some companies from Europe, some renewable energy companies, some power industry companies. Well, they literally put the emission reduction performance as part of the you know, executive packages. Yeah, so I think they also disclose it. I think it's not difficult to find that, you know, some percentage of their compensation is linked to emission reduction performances. But I think it is a process probably starting now in Hong Kong, because some I think institutions already start talking about this. Some some associations are already talking about this, and it is really, you know, understandable to a lot of people now because of the recent extreme weather. You know, people really see the risks are coming, and therefore, I think we have gone a long way, and we have seen examples, and it's not difficult to find how the directors are being held responsible for poor performance. Yeah, thanks.
No, that's very useful. Okay.
Lemon, if you don't mind, can I you know, add very quickly that, you know, I think the concept of materiality has to you know, play a role here. So, you know, like if you are a steel mill, you know, like a company, then, you know, like I think, you know, that would make a lot of sense to you to pledge your executives' compensation to the, you know, like emission standard. Yeah. However, you know, like if you are a service company, then, you know, like packing it to how good you are going to reduce your carbon emission may be a little bit tricky. So, you know, I think materiality, we can't apply the same like framework or compensation framework across the board for all listed companies or companies alike. But it's really a matter of industry that you are in. It's a matter of where you start. I think and this will be a very difficult thing for the board to consider.
No, thanks for that very useful addition to it. I think those were the questions that I had. There were a couple more questions from the audience that I want to tackle before we close the give the mic back to Albert to close the event. But of course, I also want to give everyone a couple of minutes at the end to make some concluding remarks, just to bear in mind. So one question that we just received is around how do we bring this ESG mindset for investing into the mass audience? So we're probably not there yet, but when would we, because we all talk about the large companies, what are they doing? The nets, zero asset management, what are they doing? But how about retail investors or an SME, if they want to be more ESG savvy minded and they want to get a loan or insurance that will help actually drive at a very minuscule level the SDG goal, what could the banks or insurers do? Maybe that's a policy-ish question, looking at Rocky, but similarly, if Roy or Dr. Zhang have some ideas how to bring this to the masses, that would be good as well.
I think one part is that investor education is very important. So I guess the more that we talk about it, the more likely it will be heard. That is one thing. The other thing is that I think while in this part of the world it may not be seen as the mainstream just yet. I think in other places, including the US, but more so in European countries, this is already, like the bread and butter for a lot of the investors. I guess, it really has to start with the education part. So think about kids, like they do not think of, investment when they are still in elementary school. They pick up the knowledge from their teachers. And if the teachers are really, putting much emphasis on this relevant matters, then I guess, the kids, as they grow and become, a retail investor at some point, then they would be more devoted to this kind of asset classes.
I fully agree. Education early on is key to getting that awareness. Roy?
Yes, I would like. I think Rocky has covered most of them. I think as a practitioner, I'm really amazed and surprised to see the huge demand in ESG expertise. I mean, over the last couple of years, and I don't know, probably because people see really now, because of the more and more extreme weathers, the hill fire in California, in Amazon, the flooding that everybody can see in Europe, in China. So I think it's more become a knowledge to everyone. I mean, a common knowledge in some sense. And I compare this to I mean, my time, when I joined this climate change industry, nobody talks about it. They question it, and even the previous president of the United States withdrew from the agreement. So, I mean, you've seen a big change. You've seen, especially the young generation asking about everything on, your contribution to a better world. And I've seen it is because also of the improvement in communication too. I mean, you can see immediately what happened in the other side of the world, and just look at what it takes now to change from a very high energy intensive economy to a low carbon economy. And you see everything is changing, from the basic transportation to housing, to your products, to the food you are eating. Everything is moving very, very rapidly. The front runners, they always get the first bite. And therefore, for business person, you don't really need to tell them what to do. But for the majority of people, yes, I think education, you still have to invest a lot. But I think more tangible plans, I mean, look at Hong Kong. I think it is good that they established an office recently, but for a long time, you do not know what is going on to really drive the change in Hong Kong. I may be speaking a bit too much on this, but I'm very happy to see the plans. The climate neutral, the reduction plans, the ways, the consultations. I mean, let's get going. I mean, people will then see what is needed to themselves.
No, definitely. I think was it Obama who said this is the first generation to feel the impacts of climate, and the last to really do something concrete about it. So we covered a lot of different items. So before I hand over to Professor Chung to close, can I ask each one of you to maybe give 2 or 3 key takeaways for the audience to give it a bit more think over the next couple of weeks, I guess. Roy or Rocky?
Oh, okay.
Who wants to go first?
Maybe, yeah, let me go first. I think it's a privilege to share in front of the audience. I think most of them are students, and some of them I understand are auditors, and that's why I share with you, what I see from an auditor firm. Yes, there are a lot of demands, and everything starts from the finance first. So there will be a lot of, financial activities going on in the next couple of years, I'm sure. And getting know what is ESG mean to you and to your career, to the work that you are doing, would be a necessity, not a luxury anymore. And I think the more you know, the better you would proceed, the easier you would be successful. Yeah, so I'll hand over to Rocky.
Yes, thank you very much, Lemon, again for having me. There's only really one thing that I would like to highlight. Finance is always a means to an end, and the end is to serve the real economy. So for us, in the financial services industry, we are really here to channel the resources at the right price to the right projects. And so going forward, like FSDC will continue to join hands with the other stakeholders to do this. And to the audience, well, time is of essence, and we have to do it, and we have to do it now.
Yep, definitely. I think it's pretty clear to the audience that we have to act now, and it needs to be a collaborative effort between policymakers like yourself, Rocky, professional services firm, the academics, the financial service firm, and the list that comes. So it needs to be a concerted effort. And so really thanks everyone for joining us, and I'll hand over to Professor Tsang.
All right. Well, thank you very much to our outstanding speakers, my colleague Colin and Roy and Rocky, in delivering this very insightful and practical knowledge about ESG to all the professional attendants here today. It is without a doubt that the concept ESG, starting from the time Roy mentioned that no one cared about it, actually 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, when I started to pay attention to this ESG and CSR concept, and no one paid attention to my research as well at that time. Okay, but suddenly after 10-year development and then motivated by regulators and then professionals, and so now ESG has become a very important topic, and not only just in Hong Kong, but in pretty much everywhere. But Hong Kong, given we have such a developed capital market, we certainly need to play a leading role here. And so as you can see, all the attendants can see that every seminar that we have is we have academic people, corporate executives, and we have regulators. And so, and we are all working on ESG. So this suggests the importance of this topic, as mentioned by also by Roy and Rocky. It seems like we all need to better prepare ourselves for this ESG movement. starting from this generation, right? So from the young generation and to the current professional practitioners. And so thank you to all the other attendants for attending the seminar hosted by the CSAP Center of PolyU today. And we believe that through such information and knowledge sharing, and all of us are able to learn more from each other about this particular ESG movement. And finally, representing the center, I would like to thank you for the great support from HKIRA and also from our partnering the institution and also EY and the Financial Service Council, and also our center assistants, Helen and Carol, for their great support